a number of incidents that have occurred in the last 5 years. San Bruno, and then the Marshall, Michigan spill. I was on a panel that the NTSB called after one of those incidents where, a fire chief stood up and said, "We had no idea we had a pipeline in our community." There was a lot of discussion then whether he should have known, whose responsibility is it for him to know, how do we make sure that people like that know, and that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So we have a lot of people that have been thinking about this for a long time, and first up is going to be Sam Hall, and I'm going to grab my paper here so I get his title right. He's the Senior Program Manager for Program Development for PHMSA. He's been with PHMSA for a number of years. I've worked with him in all kinds of different capacities. And let me find his presentation. Oh, someone dared me to put this on for a second. So there, it's on camera. This is starting about 3:30 this afternoon. We'll be running around with this on. Mr. Hall. Up and down buttons.
Up and down, okay. Thank you, Carl. My name's Sam Hall, as Carl said, and it's very nice to be here at this conference. This is the first one I've attended in, I think, 3 years. I think I missed the last 2 years, and I find this to be one of the best conferences in the industry because it brings together such diverse folks, and as Carl said in his opening yesterday, it results in constructive conflict, which I think is a very good thing, a very important thing. And as a government employee, it's critical to good governance. So what I hope to do over the next few minutes is give you sort of a broad picture of things. It's challenging to paint emergency response in the pipeline world with a broad brush. There is a lot of variability across the country regarding what's happening. But I hope to give you sort of a broad picture and then present some ideas about how we can crack this nut, so to speak. I apologize for the blatant use of clip art here. But I think it's a picture that really replaces a lot of words. This is, I think, illustrative of what happens at the local level in a lot of instances. You've got your local government folks with overwhelming responsibilities for a lot of things, and you've got a lot of people clamoring for their attention. It seems that even if you're yelling loudly, you're not necessarily going to get the attention. Unfortunately, what sometimes does get attention is a major incident, a tragedy, and then you see action, and that's unfortunate. So this picture is, I think, it kind of points out that local governments have a lot of responsibilities. Here's the boring stuff. Of course, our regulations do require pipeline operators to engage with local governments. That's the point of this slide. 49 CFR 192, 93, 94, and 95 require operations plans and emergency response plans for pipeline operators and related facilities. And our public awareness regulations, which are currently based on the American Petroleum Institute Recommended Practice 1162 version 1, require pipeline operators to conduct public awareness campaigns targeted to these 4 bullets: affected public, local public officials, excavators, and emergency officials. So our regulations do require this kind of communication from pipeline operators to local governments. Those public awareness programs that pipeline operators are conducting are producing positive results. There's no question about it. And I can say that pipeline operators have undertaken real serious effort to conduct high quality public awareness campaigns. The results vary. Despite best efforts, you see some varying results in those public awareness programs, meaning who's actually aware, who's receiving the messages, what actions are they taking. The programs are improving. We're learning a lot about how to do this better. And it is an ongoing learning process. You know, awareness, I like to say, is a journey, not a destination. It's something that has to keep going on and on. We also know that local public safety officials do care about pipeline safety when you talk with them about it. Not in every case. Again, it's difficult to paint this with a broad brush. Sometimes messages fall on deaf ears. Sometimes messages simply, it's perceived that, hey, I don't need that information. I know what I need to know. But when you talk to a local official, especially emergency responders, for example, they get it. They understand the idea of hazard. They understand the idea of public safety around pipelines. They also have a lot of competing priorities. The pipelines, in many cases, are out of sight, out of mind, and they're worried about house fires. They're worried about tanker truck rollovers. They're worried about rail issues. Those are pressing issues for these communities. So those competing priorities work against our efforts to raise awareness about pipeline safety. The topic of this whole presentation and this panel session is how do we engage with local governments? And in my mind, that means we have to ask the question, who's the boss? This top paragraph, I'm sorry for the wordiness of this slide, but our public awareness regulations apply to pipeline operators. They do not apply to local governments. We, PHMSA, states, don't require local governments to engage. We require pipeline operators to go out and send the messages, to speak, to conduct public awareness programs. Local governments are not required to take action based on those public awareness programs. There's nothing in the regs that say, you know, that local governments have to do anything. So that begs these questions. What drives local government activity? It's not our public awareness programs. It's not pipeline operators' public awareness programs. It's not PHMSA's regulations. Who does local government trust and listen to? Do they trust the federal government? Maybe. Do they trust pipeline operators? Maybe. They do trust themselves, and they trust the people that they trust. So that's a good question to ask. How do public safety personnel receive critical communications? What are the channels for them receiving that information? If you create something new, and we've heard this again and again from emergency responders, you don't have to recreate this wheel. There are ways to talk to us. There are existing channels that you can use to share information with us that we trust, that we will use. Please tap into those. Don't start something new that that will further complicate our lives because of these competing priorities. Another question: who trains public safety personnel? Where do public safety personnel, and I'm talking about emergency responders, police, those folks, who trains them? How do they train them? What training standards or requirements apply? If they have to take this training somehow, of course, every firefighter has to be trained. How do you plug into that? How do you meet them where they live, meet them where they already are? And then, of course, how can you engage as a local resident? You know, local governments listen to their local residents, and an informed and active public really can drive a lot of change at the local level. And we've seen that across the country. Not in every locality, certainly, but in those areas where we have a group of concerned, informed, rational citizens who want to do the right things, you see real action at the local level and real engagement from local governments. So how do we get local governments to pay attention? In my view, you institutionalize pipeline safety at the local level. You create sustainable pipeline awareness solutions. You pursue initiatives that require and empower local governments to engage through existing channels. So what do I mean by that? I mentioned training standards. If you have a training standard, for example, firefighters are trained to standards that are established at the state level. States establish firefighter training curricula. If you can plug into that firefighter training curricula, now every firefighter that is trained in that state is going to receive information about pipelines. You've institutionalized pipeline safety in that training standard at the state level. You can include pipelines excuse me, in hazard mitigation plans. Hazard mitigation plans are required. If you have pipelines in hazard mitigation plans, action must be taken at the local level to deal with the hazard of the pipeline. Excuse me. Regulation is another good way to do this. PHMSA is currently pursuing promulgating a reg on 811 enforcement. You know, every state in the country has a damage prevention law, but not all states enforce their laws. We know that excavation damage is the leading cause of pipeline incidents that kill people and damage property and hurt the environment. So if you are enforcing the law, you must call before you dig. You're going to drive down these incidents. You're going to raise awareness at the local level. Part and parcel of all of that is creating high quality resources for local governments. And, you know, we do have those. Pardon me, Carl. You know, the Pipeline Safety Trust just produced a really wonderful resource for local governments. It's in your packets. There are many other examples. The training materials that have been created, and you're going to hear about some of those from the other panel members, including the Pipeline Emergencies Training Curriculum that PHMSA developed with the National Association of State Fire Marshals. You also have information resources. The National Pipeline Mapping System is one. We've heard loud and clear that the NPMS is not currently adequate for proper emergency response awareness and training. And we have an information collection docket on the books now to address how to improve the National Pipeline Mapping System. We held a public meeting Monday to discuss improvements to that system. And we anticipate in the future collecting better information that's more useful for communities and for emergency responders. The Emergency Response Guidebook, ERG, that's the acronym there in the second to last bullet, is a guide that emergency responders use for the initial response to hazardous materials incidents. It's a commonly used reference. PHMSA produces it, and in the last edition, 2012, we included some white pages, that is information pages in the guide that address pipeline safety. What do you do? What does a pipeline look like? What do the markers look like? Where, you know, what do you do in the initial moments of an incident? What are the signs of an incident? Those kinds of things. This is a guide that's used all over the country by local emergency responders. We're institutionalizing this idea. PIPA, the Pipelines and Informed Planning Alliance, is another wonderful information resource for communities. Had a great conversation at lunch about it. Communications guides are all over the place. More are coming. Recommended practices, of course, which you're going to hear about later in the panel. And then, of course, there's this opportunity to create common messages that apply to all pipelines. There's no substitute ever for a pipeline company being engaged with the local emergency responders. You must engage with them. That is key. But there are lots of common messages for pipelines that we can share better at a national level. What do pipelines look like? You know, where are they? The National Pipeline Mapping System, that kind of stuff, thereby freeing up pipeline operators to focus on the real work of maintaining liaison with emergency responders. And I think this is my last slide. I wanted to highlight some examples of forward progress that we're making. I discussed the idea of training standards. These are the standards that are used to establish the training curricula for firefighters at the state level. If we can tap into those standards, now we're ensuring that firefighters are getting the training they need about pipelines. The National Fire Protection Association, the NFPA, Standard 472, which defines competencies for hazardous materials responders, is being updated currently to include pipelines as a container for hazardous materials. The standard before now was silent on pipelines, and it is no longer. That standard is used by many states to establish the training curricula for firefighters at the state level. That's exciting news, and we want to thank the NFPA for the work that they're doing. The National Emergency Number Association, or NENA, has a new standard 56-007, which is a protocol for pipeline emergencies for 911 call takers. That never existed in the past. 911 call takers getting a call about a pipeline emergency didn't have a protocol for handling that call. And they do have a protocol for handling heart attacks, choking, the kinds of things that 911 gets called about. They didn't have one for pipeline emergencies. Now they do. It's my understanding that NENA is going to be pushing forward with a training program to really implement this new standard. I mentioned that we want to get pipelines into hazard mitigation plans. If you can include pipelines in a hazard mitigation plan, you really change the game. We've found that most hazard mitigation plans consider pipelines infrastructure that are subject to external hazards, right? Hurricanes, flooding, earthquakes. What you don't see in hazard mitigation plans is the idea that pipelines themselves have some inherent risk associated with them and may represent a hazard to the community. FEMA has been working with us to develop a primer for including pipelines in hazard mitigation plans at the state level, driving that change to the local level, starting to look at pipelines as a hazard in themselves for communities to address and be aware of. One call law enforcement I mentioned. There are lots of other efforts going on, local, regional, and national efforts to institutionalize local government engagement. Some of those have been done with the technical assistance grants that PHMSA manages, and some have been completely independent. The third to last bullet, the Public Awareness Program Working Group. This is a group that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, but many of the folks in the room are on, and the trust is on the Public Awareness Program Working Group. Rebecca is the representative. We're working to look at public awareness programs holistically, what's working well and what's not. And we're conducting SWOT analyses, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to look at public awareness programs holistically and determine, what can we do to make things better? What can we highlight and emphasize in the future? We intend to publish a report on these SWOT findings sometime next year, and we hope that will serve as a foundation for making some real positive change. The industry is doing a tremendous amount of work here, and I don't want to steal any time from the folks here at the table, but there is a lot going on there, and I know that they're going to talk about some of those things. And the last bullet, Donna is going to be talking about the Georgia Pipeline Emergency Response Responders Initiative, or GPERI, which is also showing a lot of promise. So it's just a little teaser for Donna's presentation. That's it for me. My contact information is here. If you'd like to write it down and give me a ring or send me an email, I'll be happy to talk with you more about some of these ideas. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.